So I too am joining, and as is Benjamin, from Ottawa, so I'd like to acknowledge as well, joining today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. So today we're going to give you an overview of our sustainable affordable housing funding offer, and with a particular focus on how to get set for a successful application to our program. So just next slide, please. Great. So for those of you that may not know FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been the national voice of municipal government since 1901. We have nearly 2,000 members across the country, representing more than 90% of Canada's population. FCM advocates to the federal government on behalf of municipalities and also delivers programming to help municipalities tackle local challenges. Our largest program is the Green Municipal Fund, or GMF. It was established in the year 2000 through an endowment from the federal government, and it's managed by FCM with oversight from Infrastructure Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Natural Resources Canada. GMF is a leading program in driving local green innovation across the country through training, resources, and funding. To date, GMF has invested over $900 million in more than 1,300 projects, resulting in a reduction of 2.6 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is the equivalent of taking nearly 600,000 cars off the road. In 2019, the federal budget significantly expanded the work of GMF through a $950 million investment in 3 new streams of programming focused on increasing energy efficiency in residences, large community buildings, and affordable housing units. Of this, $300 million was allocated for sustainable affordable housing. In its 20 years, GMF has funded some local affordable housing projects. However, this investment significantly expands our capacity to do so and has created a stream of funding that's focused on and designed to meet the needs of affordable housing projects specifically. The program launched in May and was designed with the guidance of an advisory group made up of experts currently working in the sector. So some may wonder why affordable housing needs to be sustainable as well, and how a sector that already contributes so much in terms of social good can really fit within Canada's climate goals. But a significant percentage of Canada's carbon emissions come from buildings, and the vast majority of affordable housing stock across the country was built over 25 years ago with inefficient boilers and single pane windows, and they cost a lot in energy to maintain. Some data from the BC Nonprofit Housing Association shows that social housing units typically use 52% more energy per unit area compared to market housing. These buildings are great candidates to reduce energy use and emissions. And in this context, the affordable housing sector is really in a position to lead. And there are already many great organizations and projects paving the way. Next slide, please. Perfect. One example of a provider leading the way is CCOC here in Ottawa. Their Beaver Barracks project included the first in Canada use of thermal barriers on balconies of units to ensure that they were not a major source of heat loss as they would be in a typical building. And it was also Canada's largest at the time residential geothermal heating, cooling, and hot water system, as well as resident engagement on energy and water conservation. GMF funded a study for this project prior to the introduction of the Sustainable Affordable Housing Offer, and CMHC funded the capital project. As CCOC's Executive Director Ray Sullivan noted, this is a great demonstration as to how the affordable housing sector can innovate in energy efficiency. But not only are there benefits for the environment in the sector leading the way on these projects, there are also incredible benefits to you as providers in completing energy retrofits or building new builds to high efficiency. There are great opportunities to reduce operating and maintenance costs of the buildings, where retrofits can actually result in 40 to 60% savings in energy costs. This is especially true when residents don't pay directly for utilities, where use is typically 133% more energy per unit area. But beyond cost savings, energy retrofits can be combined with other planned upgrades in your asset management plans and can provide an opportunity to increase resilience of your building in a changing climate. These projects are also a way to improve the health and well-being of your residents, for example, through improved air quality or by providing a more affordable option for cooling, the lack of which is becoming more and more of a health risk in a warming climate. So recognizing that the capital costs for these projects is really what it's going to come down to, that's where we come in to make it possible. The $300 million Sustainable Affordable Housing Offer is intended to fund projects over the next 7 years through approximately $52 million distributed in loans and grants annually. This funding has been designed in consideration of other potential funding sources available for affordable housing projects, and it's stackable with CMHC's National Housing Strategy programs, as well as other federal, provincial, or territorial and municipal funding. Our funding will also support capacity building activities, which Benjamin will speak to a little bit later in the presentation. As a part of the Green Municipal Fund, environmental objectives are obviously at the core of the program, and our triple bottom line objectives have really focused each aspect on the positive impact of energy efficiency and other sustainable measures, even through an economic and social benefits lens. We wanted to ensure that the environmental projects that we fund reduce utilities and operating costs and have positive social benefits like improved resident health and comfort. We're also aiming to increase the capacity of the sector to take on these types of green projects through capacity building and supporting other sector organizations. For an organization to be eligible for our funding, the lead applicant must be either a municipal government, a municipally owned corporation, or a nonprofit housing provider or cooperative. For SAW, nonprofit housing providers include those delivering transitional housing, supportive housing, or non-market rental housing. And generally, we're looking for buildings that are owned and operated by one of these organizations. For this program, federal, provincial, and territorial organizations, as well as private for-profit developers, are not eligible for funding. Next. Thank you. So for a project to be eligible for our funding, we have both an energy efficiency and an affordability requirement. From an affordability perspective, rents for at least 30% of the units of a project must be less than 80% of the local median market rent. This requirement must be maintained for the duration of the contract with FCM. And retrofit projects must aim to achieve at least a 25% reduction in energy consumption, which is the starting point of our sliding scale grant that Benjamin will walk you through shortly. New build projects must aim to achieve net zero energy ready or net zero energy. And as additional guidance for new builds, we're typically looking for a very energy efficient building that has a total energy use intensity of 80 kilowatt hours per meter squared or less. For either retrofits or new builds, we're not prescriptive in terms of the methods or standards used to achieve these thresholds. And we will accept a portfolio of projects in an application. However, each project will need to meet these particular eligibility criteria. And so I'm now going to pass it over to Benjamin to walk you through our funding and our application process.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. It's fantastic to see such a high degree of interest in sustainability and affordability in housing in Canada. I know that some of you may already be familiar with our funding, but I'll just go through a brief overview of the types of funding in grants and loans that we offer through the program before I get into the details about what we look for when evaluating an application to the fund. So our funding is available to support either retrofit or new construction projects at 4 different stages. To start off with, we have a grant available for project planning. which is really at the concept development stage when you're considering options for what you might want to do either with your existing building or with a potential future project. So it's a really good opportunity to start with stakeholder engagement, to find out what your needs are in terms of housing and improvements, to identify potential consultants that you might want to work with, and potential sources of funding. It's also a really great opportunity to start thinking about those energy outcomes, because oftentimes beginning with the end in mind is a really great path to success. If you feel like you're fairly confident about what you'd like to do, you can go forward with a study. A study is when you get into the real detail of what you'd like to implement in order to save energy and improve comfort in your buildings. Studies can include everything from energy assessments, energy modeling, to financial evaluation, to any other kind of work that you would need to demonstrate that your project is feasible to go forward with a capital investment. We have a grant available for pilot projects. Not every project will need to go through a pilot stage, but there are a few projects out there that are outstandingly innovative and that really need to test out what you would like to do before you roll it out across all of your buildings. So in those cases, we can offer a small grant to do a few tests on a small number of buildings in order to demonstrate that the project is viable and can be implemented more broadly, typically within your own portfolio. And finally, we have the majority of our funding, which is offered to capital projects. So once you have a very well documented project, you know what your energy outcomes are, you know who's going to be involved, you can apply to us for funding for either completing the works to do with your retrofit or a portion of funding to go towards your new construction of a highly energy efficient building. So this table gives a very dense outline of the funding that's available at different stages. If you haven't seen it before, I'd recommend taking a screenshot now. It's also available, all of this information is available in our application guide, and we'll give you a link to our application guide at the end of the presentation. Very briefly, just to give a quick overview, at the planning stage, we offer up to $25,000 to do those initial works, identify the scope of your project. For your study, we can fund up to $175,000 in grant funding towards your detailed study. For a pilot project, the maximum grant amount is $500,000. And then for capital projects, we have a variation in the amount of funding that's offered based on that funding landscape that Jen mentioned earlier in the presentation. So for retrofit funding, we can fund up to 80% of the total cost of your retrofit. And that typically would include your energy and non-energy costs to make sure that your building is really in the 21st century in terms of quality, affordability, livability. We can offer financing of up to 10 million for 80% of the costs, of which a portion is given as a grant. And the portion that's offered as a grant directly corresponds to the projected energy savings achieved through your retrofit. So if you achieve a 25% savings, as shown in the study, we can offer 25% of the amount that you ask for through GMF as a grant. If you achieve a 35% savings, 35% of your funding request can be offered as a grant, all the way up to savings of 50% or more, which you might achieve through some really innovative things like energy sprong or a passive house retrofit. So if you're really saving a high amount of energy, we can offer up to 50% of the capital financing that you request through the program as a grant. And that's designed to incentivize really deep energy retrofits that are addressing those fundamental energy deficits that we see in some of our existing affordable housing stock. And we really do want to encourage you to pursue significant outcomes as you go through your project planning. For new construction, we also offer up to $10 million in capital financing as a combination of loan and grant, but we always offer a 50% grant. And that is reflecting the very high degree of energy efficiency that we like to see in new construction projects. We only fund up to 20% of your total new construction budget. And that's because there are a number of majority funders available through CMHC, through provincial programs, through local banks and credit unions. So we really are designed to fund 20% of your overall capital costs, which we think is a very good reflection of some of the additional costs that we would typically see in order to build to a high degree of energy efficiency. Again, all of these details are laid out in our application guide. So please do take a look through the guide and find out how the rules and restrictions apply. And so with that funding in mind, a lot of people ask, what does it take to be an excellent project in the eyes of the Green Municipal Fund? We really look for impact, implementation, and transformation as the three key areas of demonstrating very, very innovative and interesting project according to the fund during our evaluation. So for the impact portion of our evaluation, as Jen mentioned, we look at the triple bottom line. It's about going beyond just the minimum energy thresholds and really considering holistically, how does this project affect residents and the community? For environmental benefits, we certainly do look at energy performance as a key indicator for the project. As Jen mentioned, for new construction projects, 80 kilowatt hours per square meter is a good minimum threshold. But if you're going beyond that with some really interesting innovations in energy efficiency and on-site energy generation, that really will contribute towards a positive review of your application. We also consider GHG emissions during our energy and environment review, and look at aspects of climate resilience, water efficiency, any other things that you may be including as environmental outcomes in your project will be considered as part of your review. For economic benefits, we really do look for cost savings and affordability. A lot of Canadians are faced with high energy bills, and even if your organization is paying for energy, or if residents are paying for energy, in either case, significant cost savings can be achieved through a retrofit or an energy efficient new construction. So taking stock of that, making sure you account for the long-term savings that can be achieved through a retrofit or a new construction project is really important for us during our evaluation. This has a strong impact on housing affordability, and it's really important that we consider that thoroughly. For social benefits, resident comfort and health are often positive social benefits of energy efficient construction. We often find that by using better technologies, better insulation, higher quality air pumps, for example, we can have a positive impact on well-being within the building. So make sure that during your study stage, you're considering these triple bottom line benefits. Don't just focus exclusively on energy, look more broadly on project impacts to show the overall story of how this project will bring about positive benefits for your residents and your community. It's also very important for us to have a clear plan for implementation. And this applies at all stages of funding, whether you're applying for planning, study, whether you're doing a pilot that leads into a larger project or completing your project. It's very important for us to have a complete work plan that demonstrates everything that you would like to achieve and the costs associated in order to have a clear path towards the outcomes that you desire to achieve at that stage. A clear plan for implementation would typically involve a certain amount of stakeholder engagement to make sure that your community is on board. It would involve identifying your team and partners, providing biographies or CVs for the people that are involved in completing the project. As I said, in your work plan and budget, have clearly defined milestones and activities so that we know exactly what you'd like to do as you go through the project. For example, in a study, you might want to identify that you're doing some community engagement and say specifically that you'll be hosting a number of town hall meetings, charrettes, online consultations, surveys, specific things that can show, okay, this is what we're going to do as we go about our study. It's also important that you address risk management. We want to make sure that you have considered possibilities that may impact your ability to succeed in the project. There's an opportunity to talk about this in your application form, but you could also address this as part of your study. Monitoring and evaluation is important for all projects. We do ask for a post-project report once your project is complete so that we can see the overall outcomes of your project. In particular, though, I would really stress if you're considering pilot project funding, make sure that you dedicate a significant amount of time and effort to monitoring and evaluation so that you know that your pilot has achieved the intended outcomes and that it's really worth investing in that way on a larger scale. And finally, your implementation plan should include financing. And again, you can do some of your questions around financing at the study stage, but we really do look to see a complete project pro forma that includes a very thorough budget and an indication as to your ability to financially sustain the project. The purpose of the fund is to help you operate efficient, affordable buildings in the long term. It's really intended to set you up to keep going forward in a cost-effective way to provide housing. So a complete financial picture is really important for us to evaluate during your capital project application. And that includes identifying other sources of funding as well. So if you have other sources that are contributing towards this project, or if you have existing funders that are contributing to your operations or your existing capital costs, please do identify and be transparent about how financing is working for your project. And then the last piece of evaluation that is really the third axis upon which we graph projects for consideration is the ability to lead sector transformation. So I know that this is quite a lot to ask for, but these really are the things that we consider as we go through project evaluation. Innovation. Has the project suggested doing something that's a little bit beyond business as usual? Does it go a little bit into areas that are new for energy efficiency in Canada? Are there things involved in the project that really strike a chord in terms of making a slight innovation in how operation happens? This doesn't necessarily need to be just technological innovation. There can also be financial innovation or operational innovation, ways that you can save money or improve operations by doing things just a little bit differently. And that's tied very closely with audacity. We consider this in terms of relative impact. So it doesn't necessarily need to be innovation compared to Canada. It can be innovation compared to your organization or compared to business as usual in your region. How are we doing things differently through this project that really advances the conversation around energy efficiency and affordability? Capacity building is a really strong attribute to consider in your project. If you have partner organizations or other groups that are going to be able to learn from what you're doing and implement it in what they're doing, that speaks positively towards your sector transformation conversation. And also very closely related to that is replication. If your project can clearly be quite directly replicated or will lead towards other people doing the same project, and I don't mean just generically. Of course, everybody who does something interesting can say, somebody will follow this up by doing something else that's similarly interesting. But I mean, quite specifically, we have another organization that's 6 blocks away from us. They'll be keeping an eye on this, and they'll be considering doing this in 2026 when it's time to renovate their building. That's the kind of replication that we're looking for. So if you can be specific when addressing all of these considerations, that really gives a lot of strength and to your application. And here's an example of a project that was funded, again, before the launch of the Sustainable Affordable Housing Fund. But I think it has some really great characteristics and lessons learned that can be shared no matter how large or small your organization is. This is Toronto Community Housing, which is probably the largest provider of affordable housing in Canada. It was a retrofit to 7 buildings amounting to more than 1,200 units. What was particularly interesting about this project was the level of community engagement throughout the project process. At the outset, they began with a very intensive resident engagement process where they asked residents what were their major concerns about living in the building. They had a number of design charrettes, and they found out that the heating system was actually pumping a small volume of very hot air into most people's units, to the point where it was kind of uncomfortable and stuffy to live in the units in the wintertime. And a large number of residents were actually leaving their windows and balcony doors open just to have fresh air and cool off a little bit from the hot, dry air that was being pumped through the old boiler system. So they did a lot of engagement about what would be practical to implement in terms of improvements to the units without being too disruptive. Well, they also found out that there were some leaky toilets and leaky shower heads, things that were wasting a lot of water in the building. One of my favorite parts about this project is that during implementation, they actually hired 12 residents to serve kind of as project ambassadors, where they would work with tenants and other residents in the community to help them go through the modifications that were happening in their units. Through some upgrades to the boilers and central heating systems, and a little bit to do with the management of the ductwork and some heat recovery ventilation, smart thermostats in the units, low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, they were able to save 30% of their greenhouse gas emissions in this very large project, and 40% of their base energy consumption, resulting in an annual savings of $500,000 off of their annual energy bills. And this on an investment of just $5.6 million. So by doing a few a few involved changes, but nothing major to the building. It was really about just changing systems, the way that air gets distributed around the building, the way that tenants can control the temperature within their own units, that led to significant savings in energy. And this just gives a really good example of how to work closely with residents in your community, how to identify priority areas for innovation, and really pick off those low-hanging fruits in terms of energy efficiency to create a real difference in the way that the building operates. And this project was funded through our GMF Core Fund with a combination of loan and grant. Today, we would be able to offer that grant at a sliding scale commensurate with these percentage indicators that you see on your screen. So very excited to be able to offer grants that directly reflect the energy savings achieved through these projects. Looking now a little bit into the application process. When you're considering all of these different factors that go into a great application, how do you present it to FCM? At the outset, there is the planning grant. So if you're going for a planning grant, it is a simple, straightforward process. The application and workbook are available online, and really just demonstrate to us what it is that you're doing as a project. The planning grant is designed to be a simple, accessible grant that can help you get started to develop the narrative, develop the real impact that your project will present. It doesn't have to be fully developed at the planning stage. Start with the basics. This is where we're going. This is what we're interested in researching. Once you've completed your planning application, you can then move forward with a study application with a little bit more information, a little bit more insight. And that's just generally how the application process works at the 4 different stages. You'll have more information that you would have completed preparing at the earlier stage. It's worth mentioning that you can apply once per stage, and you don't have to apply for every stage of funding. If you've already got a clear sense of your project, you can go directly to a study. If you're fully prepared with all of your study documents available, you can go directly to a capital funding application. Just a side note there. If you're applying for a study, pilot, or capital project, it is more of a multi-step application. So the first step would be to submit an initial proposal form, which is evaluated for eligibility. And that gives you a chance to present again the high level of the project and get a little bit of a thumbs up from the GMF team before you go forward and complete a full application to the fund. The full application is a more detailed form where we also ask for additional supporting documents, which increase again from study through to pilot and capital applications. So the number of supporting documents that you would need to submit at each stage is a little bit different to correspond with the scope of work and the amount of funding at each different stage. You'll verify and submit your application to a project officer within the GMF team, who will then complete a review to make sure that you've satisfied the minimum requirements of the program and that you're ready to go forward with peer and internal review. Peer reviewers are independent professionals who have been working in the affordable housing and energy efficiency sectors for a long time. They take a close look into the energy performance of the building and other aspects of the building to make sure that they reflect all of those evaluation criteria that I described earlier. And then finally, it'll go forward to council and executive in most cases, who will be able to approve the application based on the review that was completed by the various teams involved. So the key thing to take note of here are the three triangles that are highlighted: the initial proposal and the full application and verification. It really is a 2-step process to go forward with an application. And so you'll increase in the detail that you provide to the program as you go forward through the stages. All of this is also laid out in the application guide. So please do take a moment to download the application guide and have a look through. It's got some great information about how to go forward with an application to the fund. In terms of supporting documents, in all projects, we would ask that you provide us your constating documents, which are your articles of incorporation, show that you're a nonprofit or an eligible applicant, and also some evidence of your local municipality's support. So in the case of a study, pilot, or capital project, that would be a letter from the mayor on behalf of council or a significant person within the municipal organization who can demonstrate or who can attest to the fact that your project will lead to community benefits. We can help you determine who and what to say in that letter. So please do be in touch with us. Even after you've submitted an initial application, an initial proposal, we can give you some support to do that. For capital projects in particular, we do have a fairly rigorous requirement in terms of documentation. You must have a complete feasibility study with energy model or calculations. We really need to see this upfront immediately with your initial proposal to demonstrate that the project is eligible for funding. It has to be complete, and it has to include all aspects that are intended in the project, not just, let's say, a portion of the project, but not including the energy. Your project financial documentation is also very important for us to review when you apply for capital funding. Remember that it's part loan, part grant. So we do need to consider this essentially as any other loan funder would. So it's exactly the same as you would need to apply for a mortgage from the bank or loan financing through major programs like CMHC. We also look at your organizational financial documentation, your past 3 years of financial statements, just to demonstrate that the lead organization is financially solvent and that you've got the financial management skills to move forward with a project like the one that you're suggesting. But we are here to support you. Through all of this, the GMF team really does provide application advice and guidance. Myself and my colleague Jessica are here to answer your calls and emails and really give tips and suggestions for what to include in your application to make sure that it is really strong. And as you go through the application process, your GMF project officer will also be giving you advice, tips, hints, suggestions to make sure that when you go for your independent peer review and your council approval, you've really put your best foot forward in terms of showing off the strengths of your project. We're also really excited to launch an innovation in regional energy coaches. There's a pilot ongoing now where regional energy coaches can support your early planning work and conduct walkthrough audits. And I'll get into more detail on that in a second. Our funding is stackable with other federal, provincial, municipal, and private sources of funding. So if you're considering multiple sources of funding, we really are here to be one among the many funders that can help you have a successful project. We offer flexible loan conditions that are suited to your project, and we do have a really great and growing suite of capacity building tools and resources that can help you conceptualize and move forward through a project. So really briefly, looking into some of these great tools and resources, the Regional Energy Coach pilot is ongoing. We have 3 energy coaches who are hired in collaboration with the Center for Housing Transformation, or the Center. They're based in the Prairies, Atlantic Canada, and Quebec. These coaches can coach providers of affordable housing to plan efficient retrofits. So they really are here to help you get from what can we do to this is what we can do. They assist housing providers to identify and evaluate project options, and they also help you to identify professionals who can assist you with implementation. So if you don't really know who is an energy expert in your region, they can help you consider different options and make sure that you're working with people that can really help get the project plan together and make sure that you're set up for success. They're also there to help enable applications for funding, whether you're applying to the SAW funding, to the center itself for some of the funding that they offer, to CMHC, or to any of the provincial or some of the fantastic utility-based energy incentive programs. Your regional energy coach can be there to provide assistance on how these different funding streams work together so that your project can be hopefully fully funded through different sources. The pilot's ongoing in those 3 regions that I mentioned. And if we find that there is a great degree of interest, we're certainly looking forward to being able to roll this out more broadly across Canada over the next few years. Just looking at that chart across the top of your screen, it really is going through a process of ideation through project conception to detailed design and construction. And our planning, study, and capital financing offers are really designed to stack with or go forward with each other so that you can move through each of the stages with the funding that you need to go forward with the project, with a little bit of help and support from a regional energy coach. In terms of how our funding can be combined with other sources of funding throughout the project development process. The Center, FCM, and CMHC offer all some really great funding streams that are available to help affordable housing providers with projects that include, and in the case of the other, the funders don't include energy efficiency measures. Generally, people are looking for a little bit of energy efficiency across all projects. So it's really important to consider opportunities for improved energy performance, no matter what kind of project that you're considering. For pre-feasibility organization capacity and strategic planning, I would really recommend turning to the Center, CHTC. Center.support is their website to get more information about the kinds of support they can provide. Options identification, needs assessment, and community engagement. That's a really good activities to cover using the FCM planning grant with additional support from the Center and from your regional energy coach. Once you're ready to move forward with detailed energy assessment, a business plan, and financial feasibility, you can look to the GMF study grant or the CMHC seed fund, or stacking both as opportunities to get really into the detailed design and implementation plan for your project. And finally, for construction through to your occupancy permit, we've got FCM GMF capital financing, and we have the CMHC co-investment fund, which offers some great financial options for capital construction. CMHC has a large number of other funding programs that aren't listed on this chart. So if you are interested in funding through CMHC, I recommend going to their website and learning more about the resources they offer. But in terms of connection with the FCM GMF funding offer, the seed fund and the co-investment fund are really two of the best opportunities to benefit from two different programs in order to get the funding that you need to move forward with a great project. And finally, information resources. The two case studies that we mentioned today and a lot of really great other information resources are available for download from our program portal. So I really do encourage you to take advantage of some of the great resources we've put together already to help you think of different ways that you might go ahead with a project and hopefully move forward with a really fantastic application. So without further ado, our website is fcm.ca/sustainable affordable housing. A lot of the things that I've described today are available there. If you would like to stay up to date with the latest on our programs, subscribe to FCM Connect, fcm.ca/FCM Connect, and please do get in touch with us. We've packed a lot of information into a short presentation today. I know that it may seem a little intimidating, but I promise our goal is to be in touch with you. Our goal is to work with you and really make sure that your project is a winner and that it brings great benefit to your community and gets the financial support that it needs. So write to gmfinfo@fcm.ca or call our 1877 number, and myself or one of my colleagues would be really happy to speak with you. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ben and Jen. We're now going to open the floor to any comments or questions. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom center of your screen. So without further ado, our first question is, are self-governing First Nations considered an eligible applicant for SAH?
Yes, they would be. They would kind of fall under the category of where there isn't a municipality, and that self-governing First Nation was like filling some of the role of that municipality. Then that would be a fit. We also, certainly are available to Indigenous provider, urban Indigenous providers, etc. as well.
Great. Next question. Would buildings on leased lands be eligible for the loans and grants?
Typically, as long as the term of the lease is longer than the term of the GMF loan, we would be able to fund a project on leased land. So in many cases, there are 65-year lease terms or longer for affordable housing providers that are operating on municipal lands. We would take a look at the conditions of the lease agreement and just make sure that the duration of the project is, let's say, less than the lifespan or anticipated lifespan of the operator on that site.
Makes sense. Great. Next question. How and when do you decide on the percentage of energy saving to calculate the percentage of grants? What if there is a discrepancy between the study and the final results? And to add to those two questions, how do you determine if the projected percentage corresponds with actual numbers?
This is a really great question, and I'm glad this question was asked. So as Benjamin mentioned, when you apply, we do require the kind of full study and energy modeling to be provided with that application. And so we will take a look at that study, and we have expertise in-house. We have an energy modeler ourselves on staff that will review the energy models that are provided and provide feedback. And there may be potentially some back and forth with an applicant to come to a number that all parties feel is a reasonable estimation of the expected energy savings, and then therefore what the grant would be. And so that will be kind of agreed upon and laid out in the contract, and we will not kind of pull back or change that grant amount kind of regardless of the final results, should the project be implemented as to what was agreed upon and expected at the outset. There's circumstances and realities that perhaps the performance isn't quite what is expected. There may be some, and we aren't at this stage yet, but there may be some opportunities for commissioning or work to be done on improving the performance once the final results are in. We do ask for reporting kind of 1 year out of the performance of a building, and could potentially support some commissioning work if needed. But ultimately, we aren't going to change the grant amounts based on actual. We'll decide that up front. I think I answered all three questions there, but yeah, but
no, that was a great answer, Jen. I think you covered it all, but I'll just reiterate. It really is based on the contents of the study, and we do a fairly rigorous validation of the study. So when you submit a study, we look at the triple bottom line. We look at everything that is going into your project to make sure that it's feasible and realistic, that the energy outcomes are realistic based on the scope of work that you propose, that your energy model is properly built and follows standard industry practice, and that your costs associated are reasonable costs compared to what you propose to do in the project. So we do a fairly rigorous evaluation of your capital project proposal, but the upshot is exactly what Jen said. Once we've confirmed that the project is likely feasible as presented, we'll agree with you on the grant proportion, and then move forward from there. And there is a 1 year post-project reporting. So once you've completed either a pilot or a capital project, you'll do a final report that'll say, this is what the outcomes were. And in many cases, there will be discrepancies. Not to say that we encourage there to be, but in many cases, we'll find that tenants are leaving their windows open, or that a few different things that may come into play that will just impact the overall energy performance. The only reason why I said tenants with the windows open was because of that Toronto community example. So we would really try to work with you at that point to see if there's any possibility for recommissioning, to make sure that the project is actually as high environmentally performing and saving money and energy as it can. But that's essentially how it goes.
It's a great answer, both of you. To the next question, is there consideration of carbon reduction during construction? If a novel construction method or material is utilized, resulting in a dramatic reduction in carbon footprint, can that be counted as extra points in the project?
Yeah, that would certainly be a part of the environmental benefits that we'd ask you to highlight in your application. Certainly, that would be one of the things that we would take into, like, we really do want to take a holistic view of any environmental considerations that have been factored into the project. So that's a great example of another type that could be highlighted. Absolutely.
If there's one key takeaway from this whole presentation today, it would be that we have those eligibility thresholds. But if you've surpassed those eligibility thresholds, it really is about a holistic review of the project. We really do consider all aspects. So it's not, that absolutely does factor into the review of your project for sure.
So that kind of relates to the next question as well. For environmental benefits, would you prefer to see higher GHG emission reduction or higher energy performance?
You have to meet our energy performance minimum thresholds. If you don't meet the minimum thresholds for energy performance, unfortunately, we just can't consider the project at all. So that means a 25% energy savings on a retrofit on your core and process loads, your envelope process loads, heating, lighting, central functions of the building. 25% savings in those areas, or a total energy use intensity of less than 80 kilowatt hours per square meter on an annual basis from all energy sources. And that's net. So if you're including solar panels in your project, you can subtract that in order to divide out the total energy consumption drawn from the grid. So yes, if you're doing an energy switching project where you're taking existing high emissions installations, an existing, let's say, heavy oil boiler or existing gas fixtures, and you're replacing them with highly energy efficient electric installations, you'll often find that you actually do meet those minimum thresholds. You'll often find that just by switching from, let's say, a gas central heating system to an air source heat pump, you get close to 25%, and a few other changes and you'll reach the 25% threshold. So electrification projects surprisingly often do actually meet our minimum energy savings requirement because we consider all sources of energy. That said, reduced GHG emissions speaks very highly during your project evaluation. So if you're doing an energy conversion project and you're also saving a lot of GHGs, that's kind of a win-win in terms of your evaluation, and that'll be set you on path to success in your application.
Great. Next question. If an application is complete and doesn't require a lot of back and forth, what is the rough turnaround time from application submission to approval or letter of intent?
On average, it would be about 4 to 6 months from the kind of receiving the full application to the approval on
capital
average.
projects.
For capital projects, yeah, thanks Benjamin. Yeah.
For studies, it's a little bit faster. It could be as quick as 2 months from submission of the full application. Again, we have that 2-stage process. So the first stage can take anywhere from a week to a month while we validate your information. If it's complete, it goes much faster in all scenarios. If you have all of the documentation, really great documentation that shows exactly what you're doing, the costs, the benefits, that goes a long way to speeding up your review.
Great. Next question. In terms of reporting once the project is complete, is there an annual reporting requirement?
It's just a 1-year project completion requirement for the energy performance. There is, because we do have an affordability requirement, we don't require annual reporting on rent rolls, but what we will have in the contract is basically the ability to audit or ask for rent rolls at any point during the time frame of the contract to verify the affordability requirement, but we don't require it on an annual basis.
Great. Next question. What are the general timelines for processing? Oh, you kind of answered this, but if there's anything else you want to say regarding this, well, so what are the general timelines for processing applications moving through each of the steps?
I'll just reiterate that we have a fairly rigorous review process at every stage. And we know that people like to move quickly with their projects. Once you've figured out what you've done, I too would be itching to get started and get moving. We really appreciate your patience as we go through all of the steps that are required to confirm and validate your application. So 2 months is realistically the minimum that you should expect for a planning or study application. And 4 months is realistically the minimum that you should expect for a capital funding application. I will add, though, that if you are comfortable with your project and you would like to get started earlier than once your funding is approved, if you're able to take on the risk of funding the project entirely by yourself, you can start incurring eligible costs as of the date that you submit the full application. So if you submit a full study application, you can, at your own risk, hire your consultants to get working on your project study. And then we can backdate, subject to project approval, we can backdate costs to the date that your full application was received and reimburse them at the 50% rate for those costs that were incurred during that period. So I can't recommend that you do that, but if it is a priority for your organization to get moving faster than what we're able to do in terms of review, that's one option that's available to you.
So would the buying of older bungalows to retrofit and turn them into 2 affordable units fit into this grant funding?
So our program can't fund, it's a part of our funding agreement with the federal government. We can't fund like the purchase of land or the buildings themselves. That being said, of course, we'd need to like know all the details of the project, but for a retrofit or a conversion like that, as long as the eligibility criteria was being met outside of the cost of the acquisition, that could definitely potentially be an eligible project.
Great, thank you. Next question. For capital projects, is the funding free of covenants on the building or structure?
We typically would take out a mortgage or mortgage type security on the building itself. So that would be the most typical form of security. We don't always require being in first position. If, for example, you're doing a retrofit, but you've got a bank mortgage already, we could come in subordinate to that mortgage. But typically there would be some collateral arrangement on the property involved in the project. But get in touch with us and we can find out a little bit more about your own financial details and the ability to find an appropriate kind of security for your loan.
And I think someone had asked a similar question, but related to CMHC or other funders. And I will just maybe add that, you know, we have really kind of productive relationships with CMHC and have been kind of building that as this program has launched. And we're kind of getting to the point where we're getting applications that have applied to CMHC and to us. And, you know, provided that applicant is comfortable with us having those conversations, you know, we are working kind of closely with CMHC or, you know, other funders like BC Housing, for example, to make the experience as easy on the applicant as it can be. So they're not having to kind of like navigate that themselves, that we can work on some of that behind the scenes as well.
Great, thank you. So the last question we currently have, oh, there's another one that just came in as well. Is the focus of the funding eligibility only on energy efficiency as an outcome of the project, or is sustainability across the life cycle considered? As an example, procurements, accreditation of material or equipment used or installed, or waste management.
Yeah, definitely. Life cycle analysis is a great thing to include, and actually a typical requirement that we would expect to see in your feasibility study. So life cycle energy analysis, but also other aspects of long-term sustainability that can be factored into your project design. Absolutely positively reviewed as part of your energy performance, environmental performance criteria during the evaluation process. We hear of some really great, you know, embodied carbon in buildings, you know, low carbon structures. There are some really great innovations coming out of particularly the building industry right now. And those kinds of innovations also speak to that innovation category that I mentioned, which is an important criterion for the program as well.
Great, thanks, Ben. So the last question we currently have is, again, so basically you'd be willing to accept a third place position behind CMHC and a second place affordability security with the municipality. I think it's just a confirmation of something you had previously said.
I would say certainly it's not impossible, as the question was worded. I think, you know, we would want to take a look at the project and understand it, but no, it's not impossible that we would take a third position. We recognize, particularly for, you know, our new build funding offer, where the maximum of a project that we'll fund is 20%, that, you know, we may be, you know, not the majority funder or not even the top 2 funder on a project. So, you know, we want to understand those details, and we'll work with other funders to make a project work.
So as that is the last question that we had answered today, I just want to thank you, Ben and Jen, for coming to speak with us today. It was a great and informative presentation. Just so everybody knows, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email with a copy of the slide deck, a post-webinar survey, and a link to the recording of the webinar. So thank you again, and I hope everybody stays safe.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, CHRA, for having us.
It's our pleasure.